Well, good afternoon, everybody. Great to see all of you here this afternoon. I'm Paul Erwin, Dean of the UAB School of Public Health, and I'm very pleased to welcome you today to our career conversation this afternoon with alumnus Dr. David Naftel. Dr. Naftel is an internationally recognized biostatistician and professor emeritus in the Department of Surgery here at UAB. Graduating from Auburn University with a bachelor's in mathematics and minors in physics and zoology, Dr. Naftel holds a master's degree in statistics from North Carolina State University and a PhD in biostatistics from UAB. Having joined the Division of Cardiothoracic Surgery at UAB in 1981 as an assistant professor, he became a full professor in 1995 and was also appointed as a full professor in the Department of Biostatistics here at the School of Public Health at that time. In 2021, Dr. Naftel was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Pediatric Heart Transplant Society for his 25 years designing and analyzing heart transplant studies in children. Additionally, he has served on the FDA Advisory Panel for Circulatory Disorders, for circulatory devices for 15 years as a statistical expert for the evaluation of new circulatory devices. Dr. Naftel, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you again. So you've heard a little bit of the introduction that I gave, but help us fill in around that. Tell us a bit about your career path and what made you to decide a PhD in biostatistics, and how did that lead to your dual faculty appointments in cardiothoracic surgery and public health at UAB?
Okay, so first of all, I am thrilled to be here. This is incredible fun. My wife declined to accompany me. She said she's heard it. So let's get started with a couple things. First of all, everybody who's here for the free lunch, raise your hand. I didn't say only the free lunch. Okay, good. Yeah, that was quite a little list. It's more an indication of being old than anything, but I don't mind being old. That's good. So I will tell you some because it's been a lot of fun for me. I went to Auburn, majored in math, had no idea that I was majoring in pure math. I didn't even know what that meant. So about my junior year, I went to my advisor and I said, this is really cool. I can prove theorems and this is so much fun, but when I graduate, what am I going to do? And he said, well, you'll get a master's in pure math. I said, okay. And then after that, what do I do? He said, you get a PhD in pure math. I said, okay. Then what do I do? He said, well, you'll teach at a university and do some research. And I said, what if I don't make it? And he said, oh, that'd be bad. There was no jumping off point at master's or whatever, so that scared me. I started taking zoology and physics, and like you said, had minors there. I took genetics, and that was the first time I heard of goodness of fit. Looking at Drosophila melanogaster, looking at fruit flies. And I thought that was really cool. I liked it. So I went to my professor, and I said, I want to be the first person to marry mathematics and biology. He said, well, David, you wouldn't really be first. There are 20 departments of biostatistics and biomath and all this stuff, even back then. And I said, okay, well, I want to be a biostatistician. And he said, no, you don't. He said, you want to be a statistician, not a biostatistician. And I said, okay, so where do I go? And he said, there's one place. He said, you go to North Carolina State. That's the place to go. If you can't get in there, you can go to Chapel Hill. So he said, if you do well on the GRE, you can go anywhere you want to. And I was fortunate. I did well. So I went to North Carolina State with no money. I left Birmingham. I grew up here. I left with $60 in my Corvair, drove up there, and begged for money. Well, there was a group called the Southeastern Cooperative Fish and Game Statistics Project. So it was about 11 southeastern states that had gotten together and put in some money and had this group that estimated fish kills, did deer populations, economic impact of hunters and all. And I said, that's for me. So that's what I did. Right next door to my office was Bar and Goodnight, the two guys that started SAS. And they would come to us and say, hey, David, we got this cool new thing. It's called Proc Means. It'll calculate means and all this stuff. And wow. So they would use us to test the stuff. Little did I know what a poor decision I made. If I could have joined them, they're in the Forbes top 500. I mean, they're worth billions each. So I made a little mistake there. But so when I finished up there, I said, okay, now it's time for biostatistics. And I came down here and talked to the head of biostatistics, David Hurst, and he said he'd hire me half-time and I could go to school half-time. So I did that. So deer and fish kill, that was all fun, but going to human beings, to me, was a step up. So while I was working on my PhD, as people would come in needing a consultant statistician, I'd get to work with faculty members, in particular Ed Bradley, and see how they did things, and I learned so much. And then, may I move into John Kirkland?
Sure. Not too far yet into Kirkland,
Okay,
because
we'll
I'll
do
need
that.
to give a little context.
Okay. Well, so from there, I realized this was a good place to work. I was offered a job at the medical center at, in Jackson, Mississippi, but I ended up staying here. And then a byproduct of all this was I met my nurse wife, and that was a good thing. So, yeah. Okay.
It's a really good thing. So, Dr. Naftel mentioned Dr. Kirkland. I'm looking around the room and gauging the median age of folks in the room, and my guess is that that most people in the room were born probably after Dr. Kirkland died. In my humble opinion, I think there were, especially in the early days of UAB and in the School of Medicine, two giants in the school that really laid the groundwork for building the schools and the university's reputation. One was Tinsley Harrison, who chaired the Department of Medicine for many years, and is the Harrison's of Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine. The other was John Kirkland, surgeon, heart surgeon, who pioneered many techniques. He gave up the chairship at Mayo to come to Birmingham in the mid-1960s when there was just not much here. But in my day in medical school, you trembled at the notion of John Kirkland walking down the hall, because he may very well stop and ask you questions right there, and make sure that you knew what you were supposed to be studying in medical school. But so John Kirkland was a giant, really, at UAB, and so I want you to tell us how you got to work with such an eminent surgeon, a world-renowned surgeon.
So I grew up off of Highland Avenue. I went to Ramsey High School, so I've gone about 200 yards in my life. When I was a teenager, I remember the headline of the Birmingham News said, it didn't say UAB, it said the University of Alabama Extension Center snags head of cardiac surgery from Mayo Clinic. It's incredible. I talked to him about that later, and he said he was just tired of the red tape, and he wanted a place where he didn't use the word power, but he wanted a place where he could do what he wanted to, and what he wanted was great. During those early days, a lot of babies were coming here for surgery to have atrial septal defects closed, or ventricular blue babies that you hear about. And I went to First Lutheran Church, my parents did, and we connected with some of these families, and some of them stayed with us, interestingly. And I actually met John Kirkland when I was a teenager. Then years go by, and I'm back here, and I'm totally aware of him, and I start, as I was working in biostat, as a graduate student, I worked on some projects with him and Dr. Gene Blackstone, and apparently they thought I was okay, so when I finished my degree, they hired me, and I thought that was pretty cool. Now, one thing I'd learned about John Kirkland, he did the first series of open heart surgeries. There had been one or two abortive attempts before him, but he did the first series. He sat down with his team before they operated on the first patient, and they worked through all the protocols. Here's what we're going to do. If this happens, that happens. He was very protocol driven. It was time for the first patient. He called everybody in, and he said, "No more thinking. Do not think." He said, "Do what I told you to do. Follow the protocols. No thinking." They did the first 7. And then they stopped, tore down the machines and all. He said, "Now, think. Tell me what you learned, what we've learned, what to do." So he was that kind of person, a statistician's dream. Because some surgeons, through my experience, they'd come to me and said, "Hey, I tried a new technique on the patient yesterday. Is it a good thing?" I said, "Hell, I don't know. Let's get some data." So he was a kind of a man. Now, working for him, so we worked long hours, worked every single Saturday for at least half a day, and then every Sunday morning we'd meet at 7 a.m. to go over research. When I first started for him, I'd been doing this for several months, and I said, "Dr. Kirkland, this coming Saturday's the 4th of July, yay." He said, "David, we have people here from all over the world. You think that fellow from France cares that it's the 4th of July?" He said, "I'll see you Saturday." So that's what we did. One day, though, one Saturday, I was working in my office, and he came in scrubs, very unusual.
Yeah.
Very. He came in, and he must have known I was getting just a little worn out, and he said, "David, I want you to know that this past week, 2 people survived who would have died except what I learned from your work." There's no way that could be true, but it just sounded so good. And I said, "Oh, okay, you want me to work all night?" So it was wonderful working for him, absolutely wonderful.
So I'm sure you have many stories of working with Dr. John Kirkland, and then it may have been once he retired, even while he was still living, you started working with his son, Dr. James Kirkland, who became, I think, head of pediatric cardiology or pediatric cardiothoracic surgery.
Yes, so Jim actually came on as an assistant professor at the same time I did, Jim Kirkland. That was 1981. I started working with him a little bit, and then I got split between father and son, and I've learned, wait, this is recorded. I've learned I'm the only person who has survived such an arrangement, but worked with Jim for many, many, many years. We started registries, we respected each other equally, and we just had a good time. So it was fun. And he, few people know this, but Jim Kirkland was a math major at Ohio State. So I could totally explain hazard functions, Cox regression, logistics. And he would, he'd just quiz me, and it was good. It made me a better statistician, and he could understand better what we were doing. So it was good.
So I'm going to take you back to your student days. Tell us about some of the experiences or opportunities that you participated in while still a student, you alluded to some of these, that helped make you successful in your career?
Yes, I was extremely fortunate. The Department of Biostatistics then was so involved across campus, and it's still true. But, you know, somebody would come in, maybe a nursing student who was working on a master's, and I'd get to see how the faculty members would take complex questions and make it simple. And I learned that again and again. Something complex, make it simple so that you can understand it, so they can understand it. I learned from these people to never use jargon. I do not do that. Never in my life have I said to someone I'm helping, I've never said ANOVA. When you say ANOVA, analysis of variance, you're telling that person, I'm smarter than you are because you don't quite know what I'm talking about. And that is not what you want as a consultant. So I never use anything like that. You know, I never tried to show them how smart I am. So that's what one of the main things I learned as a student. Also had great courses, you know, logistic regression, multiple regression, Cox regression, all those good things that a biostatistician should learn. The other thing that made me so fortunate was going to North Carolina State for a master's. That was a big program, and it just would grind people out. You had a test to take it at the end, an oral and all that, but you had to know statistics for corn, statistics for cows. These were all designed experiments, never had a cow not sign informed consent. I never had corn get up and leave. You know, these were controlled experiments, so I learned that, and then that made it great for me to be a biostatistician and work with clinical trials, because I knew what I wanted, so I could better understand when I fell short. And for me, that worked out beautifully and did lead to my other career with FDA. So my student experience, for me, just couldn't have been better.
Fantastic. You mentioned FDA, so that let's talk about that for a few minutes. You've done really an enormous amount of work with FDA over a period of years regarding new circulatory devices. How did that come about, and what did that experience involve?
So one day, John Kirkland buzzed me on the phone, and he said, I've got a woman named Linda Prince. She works for a heart valve company, Carbomedics, and she needs some help with some analyses for FDA. He said, David, I want you to stop what you're doing and help her. It'll take about 2 weeks. 5.5 years later, we went to FDA. 5.5 years. So it was early in looking at heart valves where the FDA wasn't even sure what they wanted, because they weren't sure what survival they wanted. Did they want to split by aortic mitral? All the possible side effects, bleeding, side effects of blood thinners and all that, they weren't sure. So I got to work with FDA to set some standard while I was working for this company. That was pretty good fun. And then I did get a reputation, and you'll love this, you statisticians. It became known in the medical device world that I was 100% successful getting a device approved with FDA. I was 1 out of 1. Okay. But so other valve companies came, and I ended up working for every single heart valve company. And I got to understand their pain, and then I moved into synthetic grafts and stents, and I'm working for these companies. And it was a little scary because a lot of the new devices would be a startup company. If I didn't do a good job, or if the device didn't get approved, the company disappeared. And that was scary. But it taught me a lot about the FDA, and then at one point the FDA came to me, and they do have this circulatory device panel where you actually become an FDA employee. And the way it works, it's just like a congressional hearing. I mean, cameras and all, I mean, it's something. So this panel May I continue with the panel?
Absolutely.
The panel has about 16 people, mostly cardiologists, cardiac surgeons, might be a quality of life person, a non-voting industry representative. So there's a chair. The chair would always make me sit next to him or her. So the company presents the results of whatever we're studying. The FDA presents their interpretation of the analysis, and then we judge. Did the company meet the bar of showing a difference or whatever? So it ends up being incredibly statistical. So for me, if some new or unusual methods were used, they'd start the meeting with, Dr. Naftel, please explain Bayesian inference to us. And I'd give a 10 or 15-minute talk, which was great fun, but what a responsibility. And I had to, keep it factual. What I think of Bayesian is not part of this, not right now. So it was really fun. Then company presents, FDA presents, and then they turn to me if there were differences. Now, David, why does FDA say they didn't meet the bar of the clinical trial? The company says they did. So it would be me, like I said, on closed circuit television and all. And several times, so scary, I'd make some statement and the stock for the company would go down instantly. Or I'd make some statement to make it sound like we might pass this, and it'd go up. It was really scary, but incredible fun. And one thing I learned that I thought all through COVID, and you heard about these panels for drugs, the one thing I learned, and I believe with all my heart, is FDA is a fantastic agency. These people want the truth, and that's all they want. And I was always so impressed, and with the panel members too. I thought this is a good way to do this. So I loved my years with FDA. That's good.
You've authored or co-authored a lot of research articles and have been involved in a number of large grant projects over the years. What have been some of the most noteworthy or the ones that you felt had the greatest impact?
There have been several. So Jim Kirkland and I worked with heart transplant registries that we created and recruited, pediatric and adult. The heart transplant world started changing as artificial hearts became available. So total artificial hearts or ventricular assist devices. So think of your heart, the left ventricle is the main pumping chamber that's sending blood to the body. If that chamber's not doing so well, you can get a ventricular assist device. So there's a little tube that goes into the bottom of the heart, and then it goes up and connects to the aorta, and in that tube is a propeller. There are other ways to do it, but that's one way, and that's a ventricular assist device. So your heart gets to keep pumping, but it gets a lot of help. The idea is really to try to keep you alive until a donor is found for heart transplant, but in some cases, if you're contraindicated for transplant, that's it. It's called destination therapy. You're there. So these started being developed, and NIH, FDA, CMS just started getting a little nervous. Do we really know what we're doing? And also they said we need a national registry. Jim Kirkland went for it, and me, and NIH gave it to us. And not because we were so great at clinical trials and all that. They gave it to us because they thought our science and our analytics were the best, so they gave it to us. It was interesting to me because NIH, FDA, CMS, they don't even know each other. Back then, this was 15 years ago, I had worked with more of them. I knew them more than they knew each other, but now they've done more. But to have NIH and FDA work together, then CMS that'll reimburse for the devices, it became quite a thing. So we became the national registry for all of these across the country. Then we moved to Europe, South America, and all over. So we did this. It was fun because nobody knew, what's the infection rate? What are the components that break in these pumps? If the blood's too thick, that propeller I told you about, it'll clog up with blood clots. So, you know, there's a lot to it. It was so much fun. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I remember. It's fun.
Are those registries still ongoing?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. They've transferred over to Society of Thoracic Surgeons with Jim Kirkland and all, still doing all the analyses and all. Yeah.
Fantastic. Receiving the 2021 Lifetime Achievement Award from the Pediatric Heart Transplant Society must have been just an incredible honor to receive. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How did that come about?
So all of you, as you get out there, you're probably not going to be like the Oscars and Golden Globes. You're just not going to get a lot of awards. You know, although I see you give a lot of stuff here, but in my time, you know, statisticians sat in the back room. We didn't get awards. But in this group, the Pediatric Heart Transplant Society, which in 1993, Jim and I took over all their data analysis. This is a bunch of good people. They decided 2 years ago to start giving a Lifetime Achievement Award, and I'll be dang, they gave it to me. I just couldn't believe it as a statistician. At the acceptance banquet, I told them, they had shipped it to me. I started to bring it today, I should have, but I told them, I said, I've been wearing this thing for 3 months. I went to Publix the other day, and the woman behind the cash register, she was looking at it, and there were 6 people behind me, but I felt a duty to explain it. So I did. So I looked back, actually I looked this morning, so this group, PHTS, they've published over 100 papers, and I've been the first or second author on 80 of them. So, you know, again, a little bit scary. They think they know statistics, but all they know is what I've taught them, and that's fine. So I try to do a good job. But it's just an incredible honor. And think, you know, a lot of, well, you've all been children, you all know pediatricians, you add that, make it a pediatric cardiologist, and these are good people trying to keep babies alive. They're good people, and anything we could learn, you know, helps. So, yeah, it was an honor.
That's fantastic, and you sort of preempted in that sense George Howard receiving an award. Those of you who may have seen my Friday email last week made note of the award that Dr. George Howard received from the American Stroke Association for his work, was awarded a special lecture. And I know Rachel and other folks in the communications office are going to be writing more about this. You might know that Dr. Naftel was on the search committee that brought George here. 2001, is that right? Or 1999? 2000, Jeff? 99 or 2001, somewhere around in there. But so it's fascinating to me to see those connections over the years and that history. I've got more questions to ask, but let me take a pause and see if there are questions that any of you have at this time, and we'll come back to you. But Jeff, Dr. Schakowsky.
This is more for the benefit of the current students. Clearly, you're comfortable in front of an audience, and you explain complex things to non-experts a lot. Was that a skill that you learned along the way, or was this, and how would you advise students to get used to doing that sort of thing? Because they're going to have to do this quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So part of how I became more comfortable is, I told you every Saturday morning we'd have conferences and work with John Kirkland. So he would have a conference with all the cardiac surgeons, all the cardiologists, and the extra people, around 30 people or so. Somebody would be presenting a relevant journal article. And they'd put a slide up there, And John Kirkland would stop the speaker, say, "Stop, David, explain it to us." So I learned in a hurry. Any meeting, any talk that I see, when a slide goes up, I'm going, okay, x-axis, y-axis, I mean, I'm looking and preparing myself to talk. So it was a great preparation. A few years ago, I was an expert witness for a federal court case, and I heard later that the most belligerent lawyer in Jefferson County was against me, and he just came after me and tried to rip me apart. And I'm thinking in my head, you are no John Kirkland. And he'd ask some question that couldn't be answered, and I'd turn to the judge and I said, I cannot answer that the way it should be asked. And the judge said, what? I said, well, how should he have asked it? And I said, well, he should have asked it this way, and then I'd answer it that way. And it ended up, it was just the judge and me. But the point of all this is practice, practice, practice. Be calm, be simple. You don't have to impress with your knowledge. You don't have to. As I worked with researchers all across campus, and they'd come to me and they'd say, I want to do logistic regression on 30-day death and look for interactions with age and gender and all this. I'd say, tell me what you want to do. Let's all talk English and just keep it calm. And I'll admit I got a reputation for being an incredibly intelligent guy because I wasn't, because I'd ask simple questions. If you really want to have fun when you're consulting, if two researchers come to you and you ask them, now, what do you want to do? One of them will talk, and in about 5 minutes, the other one will say, well, that's not why we're here. So I'd let them hash it out. So that's, simple practice, but do your homework too. You got to back it up.
Great, correct.
So for students who are aspiring to have a great career just like yourself, what would you recommend? Going straight through school, taking a break, doing some type of consulting so that they can become more and more in depth and have a very great career for their future?
Yeah, so, you're all young. I would trade places with any of you because I had so much fun. It was fun. But for me, and I think maybe I'm a fortunate one, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I'd play solitaire again and again and again, and I recorded every one. And I would tell my mom, on the average, I'll have 11 cards up there. So I knew. I knew. And I know most people maybe aren't that fortunate, but for me, I really liked the idea of working half-time while I was in graduate school. That was huge. If I'd gone straight, it took me longer. It took me 3 years for my master's. It took me, 6 or 7 for PhD. It took longer, but I was a much better person for it. And then just one side comment, not to avoid the question, but at one point when my son, who's a data analyst for Blue Cross Blue Shield, one point when he was a little older, early high school, he said, Dad, let me understand. How long did you go to college? And I said, well, 11 years. And he said, what was the problem? But for me, it worked. And I think pure college, boom, then work. It certainly can work, but a transition where you can see. And that's my biggest advice, if possible.
Well, you're emeritus now. You're retired.
Yeah.
So what does a typical day look for you like now? Is there such a thing as a typical day?
Not really. So yesterday I went with my daughter-in-law and my grandson to the allergist. He's just turned 4 and has walnut and pecan allergies. Did that in the morning, did well-child visit with him and his sister in the afternoon. So my wife and I, through COVID, we've taken care of our 3 grandchildren on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's so much fun. And then I think we're drinking more than we used to when they go home. But it's okay. It's okay. I'm also on 2 DSMBs, Data Safety Monitoring Boards, FDA required board for companies doing studies, and that's also fun. I get to learn a lot, and I'm the only statistician. And this is the group that says a study is going so well we need to stop it early, or it's going so tragically bad we need to stop it early. So a lot of power. And I always think that, I don't think about power, but I think you better do this right. You need to do this right. So I do that. And then my daughter, who is the executive director for the David Matthews Center for Civic Life, not Dave Matthews. David Matthews, he was the president of the University of Alabama. She's the director of that, and she's finishing up her PhD in international relations, political science. So of course I want to help. You think, well, really? You're a statistician? She's looking at the 71 peacekeeping missions of the United Nations from 1945 to now, looking at were they a success, what were the issues, looking at everything known about the conflict at the time, how much money, how many troops, and all, and it suddenly becomes this beautiful logistic regression. So she's allowing me to help with that, which I love. And then she's also let me tutor some of her fellow graduate students in statistical methods down at Auburn. And it's just fun.
You sort of alluded to this in your description just now of the history of the peacekeeping missions. You enjoy international travel mixed with world history. What are some of your favorite places?
So we love to travel. After we'd been on several trips, I came home early from work one day. I must have been sick. And my wife is with some of the other wives. They're having a big garage sale, but things are slowing down. And I walked up behind, and they didn't see me. They were looking at pictures of France that my wife was showing everybody. And one of our neighbors turned to my wife and she said, "You are so fortunate that you married a statistician." I'm positive those words have never been together in a sentence. But I was lucky. The first valve company I told you about, Carbometics, they had a big presence in Europe, so they started sending me over there to talk. I would take my children and my wife, and my daughter loved it so much that after she graduated from Auburn, she moved to France, lived there 3 years, and got a master's while she was there. She taught English to French kids. So if you go on a piece of Brittany, there are a whole bunch of French kids with Southern accents. So we got to do that. But we've traveled a lot. My top places are Machu Picchu, the Incan village in Peru. Chiang Mai, Thailand is incredible. Le Mont Saint-Michel, a big island off of Normandy. But I'll tell you my favorite. My father had the good sense to come over the day after D-Day in June of 1944. So he was in the midst of it all. He was walking along one day, and an officer passed him and saw his name and said, Naftel. Said, "We went through the village of Naftel this morning."
Yeah.
So I'd always heard that. So years later, my wife and I are in Normandy, and I'm going to several hospitals in different cities, and we had a free day. So my 2 French guys that work for the valve company, they said, "We got a free day. What do you want to do?" And I said, "Let's find Naftel." And dang if we didn't find a tiny little village in northwest Normandy. We went there, a beautiful church, a stained glass window labeled Naftel, talked to a few of the residents. No Naftels were left. They were all Napoleon sympathizers and got run out and went to the Channel Islands. I had read through my research that there was a Naftel castle. So we went looking for it, and we came to this farm with an elderly couple. Normand was their last name, And we said, we understand there might be ruins of a castle. They took us through, moving through the cows and the apple orchards. Apples are big in Normandy, and got to the ruins and of the Naftel Castle. And I thought that was pretty cool. Then they invited us in, this older couple, and they had been teenagers during the German occupation, and they weren't very thrilled about that occupation. So we talked, and very little language overlap, but I had two French guys that knew total English, and we talked. Then the man goes down in the cellar, and he comes back with a bottle. It's a bottle of Calvados brandy that his grandfather had made in 1914, before the World War I. He opened it, poured us all some Calvados. We had a couple rounds, incredibly good. Then we took pictures and all, and we left. So we got back in the car and we're leaving. And I said to my French friends, Jean-Philippe, I said, isn't that incredible the way they honored us? And he said, so you misunderstood the whole thing. And I said, well, tell me what I misunderstood. He said, you as an American honored them by coming to visit them. You're the guys that liberated their town, Naftel, France, Normandy, Europe. He said, you're the guys that did them an honor, and that's why he opened this bottle and all. So that's my most memorable travel experience ever.
Was your father still living at that time?
Yes.
And
Yes.
were you able to share that story with him?
Yeah, and bought a regular bottle of Calvados. Yeah, and years later, we got my dad to the D-Day beaches, the cemeteries.
Great.
Have any of you ever been there? Every American should go.
Yeah.
It's the best thing ever.
Yeah.
So we took my father, and he could literally say, I served with him, and also
Yeah.
it was something.
Fantastic. So for current students in the School of Public Health who may feel unsure about their future goals, how would you encourage them to explore their prospects?
Yeah, I think there's so many opportunities these days, certainly with the internet and all. I would take advantage of everything. I'd certainly join all of your scientific societies. A lot of them have student rates. I would do that. I would go to stuff like this. This might not be at the top of your list today, but it's top of mine. I'd go to stuff like this and listen. Everything where there was an opportunity, I would go listen. And then, as I said, if you can have a research assistantship, teaching assistantship, those things all help. That's part of, you asked how I, is where I am with public speaking. Teaching, oh my goodness, teaching is so good. I used to teach SAS courses here, lectures here and there. I think teaching is a great way if you can do that. You'll firm up your knowledge in a hurry when students ask you questions. But it's good. So I just say, take advantage of every opportunity.
Great. And for that next step in their careers, in their lives, what advice do you have for students as they transition to life after school, whether it's after undergraduate or after graduate school?
So we had a number of people that worked for us through the years, and I didn't know this till near the end, but when I would hire somebody new, some of the older employees would take them aside and say, we need to tell you about Dr. Naftel. They said, okay, here's the first thing. If he asks you to do something like copy, punch holes, do it. We're just trying to get the job done. Said, now, if you go and punch holes to go into a notebook, and some of those holes are on the edge of the paper, he will fire you immediately. Immediately. It's hard to do, in a state institution, but I'd give it a try. If he asks you to copy a piece of paper, don't put it crooked on there. Then they said, now, a little more seriously, whenever you walk into a meeting or into his office, always have a pad of paper and a pen, or it can be electronic, but always write down stuff. And then what I like the best, and I believe this is really being serious, and I really mean it, you're going to have problems in a new job. You'll be given a job, you're not quite sure how to do this task. You'll wonder, and you'll have problems. When you go to your boss or supervisor with a well-defined problem, always have a solution. Always. At least one solution, because you're closer to it very likely than your boss is. He might not like your solution, but it forces you to think through it. So to me, that's so important. And it got to be funny in my office. Somebody, they'd come in and, say, well, NIH has just come up with a new requirement for the American Disability Act to make sure that our software will be large print and all. Oh, what are we going to do? And then they'd say, now, Dr. Naftel, here's what I think we should do. And I loved it. And, sometimes I listened. A lot of times I did. But I think that's real important because it makes you part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And for me, that's what you want to be at work. You want to be the team player and be part of the solution. The other thing, a little side note that I love UAB for, though, UAB with all the diversity training, sexual harassment training and all that, those things are so good. They'll make you a good employee. You'll understand that not only should you be treated correctly, but the people under you and the people above you. You should all be treated correctly. I just admire UAB for doing more and more. So when you go to work, you're not entitled, but you're going to be treated, you should be treated with respect, and you're going to be a team player. And for me, those are the key things.
What incredible advice for our students and for all of us, I should say. So we have a few more minutes for additional questions from those of you who are out there. So please, don't be shy. Yes, Ananya.
So, first of all, it's been wonderful to hear you say your experiences and from the past and even now have been so fun. Like that's great to hear. When you were in the moment, did everything seem fun then too, or is it more so looking back?
One of the first annual reports to our hospitals and our cardiac transplant research database, so it's a report to each hospital, about 50, on their specific results. And I had to do some expected mortality versus actual. I had to do several things. And I remember thinking, I've got 24 hours. I don't know how to do these things. So I said, David, you got 2 hours tonight from midnight to 2 a.m. Figure it out, program it, implement it. From 2 to 4, you're going to do this. So, and I did that sort of thing. And it did hurt. It did hurt. And I put in a lot of hours, and at the time, maybe it wasn't quite as much fun as I might be indicating. But it really was a great feeling of satisfaction and all. It really was. May I say one other different thing?
Please.
As you're going out and traveling within this country and also other countries, you do not want to be an ugly American. You do not want that. My wife and I were in a little cafe in Paris, and we actually lived in Paris for a while working at a hospital. We've been there 20 times. We love France, but we always try to not advertise, I'm an American. We try to go with the flow. So we're in a little cafe, sitting eating our sandwich. It's a crowded, small cafe. And a woman walks in, and her presence takes over the place. She's loud, she's obnoxious, she's wearing a fur, and I'm thinking, she's an American. She goes to the counter, and a nice little young French lady's behind the counter, and this American woman who did not have a Southern accent. I won't pinpoint where she was from, but she wasn't Southern. She talks to this woman and she said rather loudly, "I want a ham and cheese sandwich." And the French lady looked at her and clearly didn't understand. So, what you do is you talk louder. Said, "I want a ham and cheese sandwich," and getting nothing. So the woman turns to the people in this small, crowded cafe, and she said, "Does anyone here speak English?" I raised my hand, and my wife went, "Oh." I get that a lot. So I walked up there, and I said, "I speak English. Can I help you?" And she said, "Tell this woman I want a ham and cheese sandwich." I said, "Okay." I said, "This lady would like a ham and cheese sandwich." And the woman said, "Not in English, in French." And I said, "Well, I don't speak French. You asked if anyone spoke English." But then I said, "Look, it's a glass counter. There's the sandwich, ambonne fromage." I said, "You can do this. Just point and do it." But the point is, you do not want to be an ugly American. And some things bother me when I watch American television and listen to American people tell me how rude the French are. I get that a lot. Whenever I hear that from somebody, I'll say, "And how many times have you been to France?" "Well, I've never been there." I said, "Then I'm not listening. I've been there. They are not rude. They're so nice. As long as you work with them, But if you're an ugly American, you're going to get that back." So, I'm sorry, I just felt the need to
Thank you.
say, be nice, be nice.
A good life lesson anywhere you are, right? Other questions for Dr. Naftel? Yes, Michelle.
Talked about your travel and extensive travel. Is there somewhere that you haven't been yet that you want to go?
I haven't been to Australia or New Zealand. Those are high on my list. I am getting a little older, and I'm not cutting back yet. We're going to England in May, Arizona in April, Alaska in July. So we're still going strong. I have found, and I say I'm doing this for my wife, I'm starting to move into first class on Delta. And I've got plenty of miles. It's so much more fun, speaking of fun. So, yeah, but I'd say Australia and New Zealand.
Great. Well, we have a few more minutes if any of you would like to come up and greet Dr. Naftel as he is here for a few minutes more. Please feel free to do so. But please join me in showing appreciation to Dr. Naftel. Great. So thank you very much again for taking the time out of your day to spend this hour with us. Sarah and Ebony, thank you for all your logistics and arrangements. So thanks. Thank you all.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks so much.